Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Beach Walk Vlog episode 7. Number 7 already. God, it's fantastic. So today I want to talk a little bit about the foot. Now the foot is super important, and I say that about every part of the body because every part of the body is super important. It has a part to play in gait, it has a role to play, but the foot of course is super important because it's at the bottom of everything. Everything is stacked on top of the foot. Every body part, every gram of your body weight is stacked on top of the foot. However, the foot is at the mercy of everything above. So yes, it's at the bottom. It's the thing that connects us to the ground. It absorbs a lot of shock, a lot of impact, but it's also at the mercy of everything going on above. So if I'm not stacking my weight efficiently and effectively on top of my foot in a way that's going to be effective for my foot to function, because remember, the foot has to pronate and supinate, and it has to pronate and supinate at the same time, and that's one of the cool things we're going to talk about, is how that actually happens and the movements that are a part of that. But the foot is at the mercy of everything above it. Now what I mean by that is, if your leg doesn't internally rotate, and I know I talk a lot about internal rotation because it is the biggest part of the equation, but if your leg, and specifically your hip, doesn't drive internal rotation, and when I say drive internal rotation, we can also be collapsing into adduction and internal rotation, and that's a whole different ball game. I want to be able to drive internal rotation, so that means the muscles that produce internal rotation must contract at the right place at the right time, thus thrusting the pelvis over the top of the standing leg, and the hip produces internal rotation. Now if the hip produces internal rotation, that's a combination of the pelvis and the femur. It also travels down past the knee produces some internal rotation, the tibia produces internal rotation, and we get pronation at the foot. Now that's super important. The first part that we want to have is pronation at the foot. So when the foot hits the ground, it's absorbing that shock, it's absorbing the impact, it's cushioning your body weight on top of it. But then very quickly, and we're talking between 0.18 of a second and 0.22 of a second, that's how long your foot is roughly on the ground for, 0.18 to 0.22. It might be a little bit more than that depending on how elastic or flexible you are. Remember, increased elasticity is what gets us off the ground faster. And that's what elite athletes, elite runners are good at, is getting off the ground quicker, faster. Now if you're getting internal rotation and you're hitting the ground, then you're going to pronate the foot. So the foot's going to roll medially, it's going to roll towards the midline. But then again, very, very quickly, the medial part of the foot rolls medially, the middle part of your foot rolls medially in towards the midline, and then the toes and the forefoot also pronate. As that happens, the midfoot and rear foot is supinating. So we've got a situation with the foot where it has to do two opposite movements at exactly, or not quite exactly the same amount at the same time, slightly different times, but at the same time it's producing two different movements. Well, how can the foot produce two different movements? Well, because it's got so many bones, and it's not just one piece, it's not just one bone, it's so many bones. There's lots of bones in there, and the different parts of the foot can do different things at the same time. It's like, for example, my elbow flexing and my shoulder extending, or my palm supinating and my elbow flexing at the same time. They're doing two different movements at the same time. The foot can do the same thing, and it should, and it must, in order to be efficient. Now, why am I always posting pictures and going on about toe spreaders? Well, I'll tell you why. because toe splay is super important. Oh, there's a little dachshund coming towards me, a little wiener. I have a long-haired dachshund, so that's super cool to see one out on my beach walk. So, okay, so we're back to toe splay. So we're talking about toes. Now, if the toes are all scrunched up, they don't splay, or they can't splay. And splay is that, the toes splaying outwards, so creating space between those toes. Super important for the foot. Now, if you're also wearing restrictive shoes that don't allow that, and if you look at the kind of shoes I wear, big wide toe box, I've also got my toe spreaders in as I'm walking, because I want to create that toe splay. So why is toe splay really important? I'll tell you why. When the forefoot is pronating, remember that means going over towards the midline, the rear foot and the midfoot are supinating, they're going the other way. Now, there's various ligaments in the foot, there's lots of ligaments in the foot, but there's two specific ligaments that I want to talk about. One of them's not really a ligament, but the first one is, it's called the transverse metatarsal ligament. And it's the ligament that underneath your foot goes all the way across from the outside to the inside, or the inside to the outside, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, when the toes splay, that movement in itself, the toes splaying, it pulls that transverse metatarsal ligament taut. Now, you know what taut means, because you're on the Revolutionize Your Running page, and you know that taut means stretched out. Okay, so it's pulling it taut, and ligaments don't stretch. They do a little bit, but not very much. Very resistant to stretch. So when we talk about this stretch, it's for an absolute fraction of a microsecond that it's pulling it taut. And at the same time, as we're pulling that transverse metatarsal ligament taut, because we're splaying those toes out, what it's doing is it's also pulling on the plantar aponeurosis, or the plantar fascia, and it's pulling the plantar fascia taut as well. Now, why would you want the plantar fascia to be pulled taut? I'll tell you. Well, when the plantar fascia is taut, it acts as a spring. And that spring in the foot is called the windlass mechanism. Windlass mechanism. Anything that's a windlass is a spring. It's kind of like a whipping spring. So it creates this energy return system in the foot. So when the forefoot is splayed out, it creates tension, stretch, taut tension in the transverse metatarsal ligament, which then in turn pulls the plantar fascia taut, which then creates the spring, so that we can then throw your body over the top of the foot. Now, if you don't create that tautness in those ligaments and the plantar fascia, what's going to happen? Well, imagine you sitting in a hammock, and all of a sudden the structure of the hammock just turns to rubber. It's all going to collapse, right? The hammock's going to collapse with you in it, and you're going to hit the ground. And that's exactly what's happening to so many runners who are screaming out with foot pain. So that's the first thing. We've talked about the toe splay, the transverse metatarsal ligament. We've talked about the plantar fascia. The next thing we've got to talk about is the arches of the foot. Now, there's a fundamental aspect of the foot where in engineering we call it a keystone. So if you imagine a wall with various blocks that are building the wall, and then it turns into an arch, and then in the top we have this keystone, and it's thinner at the bottom and it's wider at the top, so it just slots into place. And that creates a real strong, stable arch. Now we got 3 of those in our foot, in each foot, so we got 6 in total, 3 in each foot. So we've got the lateral longitudinal arch, that's the one that runs down the outside of the foot. We've got the medial longitudinal arch, and then we've got the transverse arch as well. So we have 3 arches, and they're all with this keystone aspect to them. Now, that's a really important feature because it provides its own internal stability as long as everything else occurs. Okay, so if we're not getting that toe splay, and we're not getting the foot in the right place at the right time, and we're not getting the internal rotation from the hip through the knee, through the tibia into the foot, then we're not going to get the pronation, we're not going to get the windlass mechanism occurring, and we're not going to get that energy return system, we're not going to get that spring working for us, right? So take it all the way back to the first thing that I said here. The foot is at the mercy of everything else above it. So we've got to have those arches of your foot. Look at how my feet are walking right now. See how my feet point forwards? They don't point outwards. I don't walk like this. Okay, I walk with my feet straight and my toes are splayed. Okay, it's a really important part of gait analysis and making sure that we've got the right thing occurring in the right place at the right time, or the correct thing occurring in the correct place at the correct time. Because if I don't have the correct thing occurring in the correct place at the correct time, then I've got the wrong thing occurring in the wrong place at the wrong time. So if I hit the ground and my foot hits the ground and my tibia turns in and my foot pronates, it brings me to the ball of my foot, and then I can create that rigid lever. And when my foot gets to this point and I'm just pressing the toe down and I'm getting to here, I'm ready to lift the heel off the ground. The midfoot here is starting to supinate, it's going that way, as the forefoot, the front of the foot, is starting to, or is already going that way. So I've got to be able to supinate the midfoot, pronate the forefoot, in order to create this rigid lever here to then get to toe off, to then propel me into internal rotation and extension. Now what happens if I walk or I run like this? I'm not over pronating, I'm actually missing pronation, and I'll tell you why. If I land like this and my knee travels straight, I should have my big toe here. My big toe should be stopping me from collapsing the arch and the toes going that way, the toes going off that way. Okay, so remember, if my foot's here, my big toe presses down at this point as the heel comes off the ground, as the midfoot and the arch supinate, the forefoot is pronating, the foot presses down, creates the windlass mechanism, which then I can then power off my toe and get to toe off. Now if I'm in this position, remember my knee is going to go forward, so I'm going to get a ton of knee issues, probably maybe here, depends on what's going on above and below. But if I get to here, look how my whole foot is collapsing. Okay, now likelihood of me having toe splay at this point and that toe splay being effective, even if I did have it, is actually pretty low. But look what's happening to my foot here. Now I'm getting a ton of torque through my foot, through all the cuboid bones in my foot, through the Achilles tendon. I'm also loading eccentrically a ton of muscles at that point. So for example, if the arch is collapsing because there's no toe splay, because my foot's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I've got 140 pounds of my body weight accelerated into the ground. So multiply that by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times my body weight going into my foot. That's a real huge amount of force. That's a huge amount of load going into my foot, right? Is there any wonder why we're ending up with plantar fasciitis? Any wonder why we're ending up with Achilles tendinopathies and tendinosis and tendinitis? Any wonder why we're ending up with tibialis posterior tendinitis and tibialis posterior strains and shin splints and all these different kinds of things, and medial knee pain? Is there really any wonder? There isn't really, is there? There's no wonder. There's absolutely no wonder why, really, when you think about it. The question shouldn't be why am I suffering with these injuries? When you're looking at how you run and you're seeing how your foot is not in the right place at the right time. Because if it's not in the correct place at the correct time, it can't do the correct movement and the correct stability can't occur. All right? And that's pretty simple right there. But all of that comes back to, how is my torso moving? Because something that's in the Runner's Rehab and the Basic 8 ebook is what's called the opposite cascade effect. And what that basically says is that as torque or force goes through each joint, it reverses. Because the ground is not moving, your foot is connected to the ground. So it can't, once your foot hits the ground, it can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do that. Everything else above it has to compensate for what's going on. And the foot has to try and compensate for it. And it just can't do that. At the speed that we're going, it can't do that. And I don't mean 5 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour. I mean the speed of the movement. Remember, your leg and your foot are moving much faster than the speed you are running at. Okay, I'll say that once more. Your foot and your leg, specifically your lower leg, are moving much faster than you are running. So if you're running at 7 miles an hour, let's just say 11 kilometers an hour, your foot has to get from behind you to in front of you and then back down on the ground. That's moving faster than you are. About 3 times faster than you are, in fact. Which is why when we do gait analysis, we have to do slow motion videos. Because we can't see what's going on in full speed because it's moving so fast. Okay, so your foot is traveling at 3 times, roughly 3 times the speed of your actual running speed. Okay? Just think about that for a second. If it's not in the correct place at the correct time, you have got no time to get it into the correct place at the correct time. Okay, you can't change what's going on in your gait whilst you're running. Well, you can for a very brief amount of time, and you probably won't do it very well anyway. Which is why the posture and the length tension relationships between your muscles at your joints from head to toe are so important. Because you can't change them whilst you're doing it. You can't change things very much or for very long, very consistently while you're running. You might be able to for a few seconds, but you won't be able to do it long term. Okay, so the foot really is at the mercy of everything going on above it. And if you're not rotating your torso well, and if you don't have very good spinal mobility, that's thoracic spine and lumbar spine and cervical spine. So we're talking about the neck, the thoracic, the torso, the shoulders, the hips, because remember, you've heard it a million times, it's all connected. But I'm the one who's telling you it's all connected and actually living and breathing by that statement, which is why you can't static stretch your way out of injuries. Okay? Which is why you shouldn't be static stretching, period. Because of that thing. Everything's connected. So if you annoy one part of your body, you start stretching the hell out of one part of your body, it's going to negatively, more than likely, affect something else. You're just going to take away range of motion from somewhere else. Now in gait, obviously we know that everything is in opposing movements. So my right shoulder goes forwards, my left hip and my left leg go forwards, and obviously vice versa. So the shoulder and the hip and the leg, via the spine, via the pelvis, to the knee, to the foot, is all so very, very, very much connected that you can't get away from it. You can't get away from affecting the shoulder when you affect the leg, and affecting the leg when you affect the shoulder. You just simply can't get away from it. It's all attached. It's all connected. So the opposite cascade reaction, we talked about that just a second ago. It's in the ebook, and it talks about force and the torque being reversed at each joint. Now what that means is that if you are producing external rotation, this movement at the hip, when you should be producing internal rotation at the hip, it's all going to go wrong. You're going to land with the foot like this. Your knee has a locking mechanism inside of it, which is, I know I said this before, super, super important, because it is. When you internally rotate the knee, it has a locking mechanism inside of it. And that locking mechanism is just so incredibly important for the knee when we are in stance phase. If the knee is unlocking when we're in stance phase, or externally rotating when we're in stance phase, you've got problems. You've got big problems going to happen. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It's a question of when. Okay, so if you have the external rotation, i.e. feet pointing outwards, generally it's feet pointing outwards that you'll see obvious. You don't have a patella tracking issue, you have a tibia tracking issue. Remember, your patella is just sitting on top, right? You don't have a patella tracking issue, you have a tibia tracking issue. The tibia is much more likely to be the problem than the patella in the knee. And I know I'm slightly digressing here, but it's all important. It's all associated with the foot, because if the foot is pointing outwards, remember your knee is going to travel forwards. You don't have a patella tracking issue, you have a tibia issue. You have an externally rotating tibia. Where's that coming from? It's probably coming from above. And it's probably coming from the back of the knee, where the muscles that affect the tibia are. It's probably coming from your glute max, pulling on your IT band, which attaches down below the knee. And that externally rotates the tibia. It's your popliteus not internally rotating the tibia. It's your VMO externally rotating the tibia, right? It's your adductors not holding on to the tibia. Your gracilis not holding on to the tibia from the inside. It's your sartorius muscle, which is also a hip flexor and a knee extensor, which is turning your leg outwards. It's doing this when you run. And you won't see it until you are actually doing a gait analysis, and you can see all these things. But all of these things will affect the foot. They'll affect it landing. So like I said, the foot is at the mercy of everything above it. Okay? Your foot is at the mercy of everything above it. So if everything above it is pulling it left, right, and all over the place, how has it got a hope in hell of landing in the correct place at the correct time and doing the correct movement? It hasn't. Let's just be honest, it hasn't. It's got no chance. It's got no chance whatsoever, and it's going to suffer. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is orthotics. Orthotics. Oh God, here we go. Okay, so your foot is landing in the wrong place at the wrong time. It has no chance of doing the correct movement because of everything above it. It's at the mercy of everything above it, and you can't splay your toes because they're so tightly bound inside of foot straitjackets, aka socks, and tight footwear that doesn't allow your foot and your toes to do what they're supposed to do. But here's a great idea, and I say this with an added bunch of amounts of sarcasm. Here's a great idea, sarcasm. Let's just stick an orthotic underneath that foot and stop it from pronating. There's a bunch of swear words that I could throw in right now, and I won't, because it infuriates me so much when I hear, oh, I'm an overpronator, so I just stick an orthotic in there. When your foot is landing in the wrong place at the wrong time and has no chance, sticking an orthotic in there is just the worst thing that you can do. Because you have to look at the reason why the foot can't do what it was designed to do in the first place. You have to look at the reason why it has no chance in hell of doing anything that it's supposed to do, because you're not giving it a chance, because your movement is not allowing it to be there. Now, this isn't your fault. You didn't know this. You didn't know any of this stuff. And that's why I'm doing these beach walk vlogs. That's why I do what I do with the Runners Rehab and the Basic Gait, to help you understand, to help you be informed, to help you be educated, so that you can say, orthotics? No. I think what I need to do is I need to fix how I move. And I need to start on the journey of fixing how I move. That's the right way to go. Here comes my wiener friend. so you have pain in your knee, and you go to your physical therapist, and your physical therapist says, okay, we're going to fix this, or your podiatrist says, okay, we're going to fix your feet. We're going to fix your feet, and we're going to stick an orthotic in there. What the? Why would you do that? Why would you stick an orthotic in there? Why would I try and fix something that isn't broken? It's not the foot's fault, remember? It's absolutely not the foot's fault that you're giving it no chance to do what it was designed to do. And sticking an orthotic in there is going to push it into supination, into early supination. Right? It's going to push it into early supination. So it's not going to give it a chance. It's not going to give your foot a chance to absorb the impact. So we've now taken away your foot's ability to absorb the impact. So what's going to absorb the impact? Dun dun dun! What is going to absorb the impact? I'll just leave that out there as a question, and I'll let you think about it. Okay, now, so we've put the orthotic in, and we're now early supinators. We're now early supinators. We've got no shock absorption, or very minimal shock absorption through the foot. Where's the next part that's going to break? Where's the next body part that's going to break? Because we don't negate forces in Gait. Right? We never make forces disappear. Right? It's impossible, because you have a body mass that's landing and hitting, colliding with an immovable object, i.e. the earth, the ground. So we have my body weight, 144 pounds or whatever I am, my foot moving at 3 times my locomotive speed, hitting the ground. So I've not only got acceleration, I've got momentum. That's the bit that people forget a lot of the time. It's not just my force, my mass times acceleration, it's my mass times acceleration plus momentum. All right, there's a lot more going on there. So when my foot hits the ground, I've got no shock absorption because I've got an orthotic in there. I'm also an early supinator, so I'm pushing my foot into supination. What's that going to affect? Oh, I'm just going to sit back and wait for the lateral knee pain that's going to occur. Right? Because if I'm a supinator, I'm also an external rotator. And if I'm not shock absorbing, what is shock absorbing? And if I'm not pronating, where am I getting pronation from? Or where am I getting internal rotation from? Because I can't negate forces. It's impossible to negate forces. All I can do is move them around. I can share the load. Okay, I cannot negate force in Gait. Okay? I can't negate the forces of Gait, I can only move them around. So if I can only move them around, and you've just taken a big part of the sharing the load equation out, what is going to bear the brunt next? Which body part is going to bear all the load next? Because you've taken away a massive part of that shock absorption, sharing the load equation. So let's just say that you've that biggest part of the sharing the load, sharing the shock absorption equation. Let's say it was 50%. You've just taken away 50% of your shock absorption ability, and you've now got 100% to deal with still, because you don't negate forces of Gait, you just move them around. So now you've got another body part, probably also that's moving really badly, that's now taking the brunt of what you're doing, of what you're giving it to deal with. So ask yourself a rhetorical question. It's rhetorical because you know the answer. Is that going to be good? Is that going to end well? Is that going to fix your injury? Or is it just going to prolong the inevitable? I'm not saying another word, because that last question is rhetorical and you know the answer. Oh, but I need my orthotics. Well, if you need the orthotics, you never fixed anything. And I said this to somebody yesterday who said, oh, well, I did some towel scrunching exercises and I fixed the problem. And I said, oh, so you're back to running? Yeah, I have orthotics. So I said, oh, so the pain went away. I said, did you rest? She said, yes. I said, okay, great. So you rested, the inflammation went down, the pain went away. You deloaded the area of stress, so you gave it a chance to recover. You stuck an orthotic in there and you're back to running. Okay, so you didn't fix anything, you didn't change much, you didn't fix anything, you didn't change the movement. Now we just sit back and wait for the inevitable, which is I still move like crap, something else is going to break. Okay, now the last thing, I know I said the last thing before, but the last thing I wanted to talk about was exercises for the foot, and why towel scrunching exercises are one of the worst things, because tucking the toes under is actually a gait dysfunction. It's actually a gait dysfunction. So I'm just replacing one gait dysfunction, or maybe I'm not replacing it, maybe I'm just adding. Because remember, I want toes to splay, right? I want my toes to splay out, which tensions all of the structures in the foot. Why would I want to do that to my toes? So that I can then, just even the thought of that makes me cringe. So why would I want to tuck my toes? Now I know some of you are going to say, oh, but it strengthens the arches. Does it? Does it really? Well, so you think that pulling a towel towards you, does that take much energy? Does that take much muscle force? No. That doesn't take much muscle force at all. It doesn't take much. Oh, well, I could do it with a resistance band. Yeah, you could, but it's still doing the wrong movement. It's doing the wrong movement. Now, how are you going to get to toe off if you're scrunching your toes up? That's another rhetorical question. How are you going to get to toe off, which is where the toes are flat on the ground and we're creating this nice stable lever, this strong stable lever? How are you going to get to that if your toes are scrunched up like this? That's another rhetorical question. Okay, so remember, strength, as we talked about in Beach Walk blog 2, I think it was, no, 5. Strength is specific to the movement and the load and the forces that are placed upon it. So if you need your toes to be strong when they're outstretched, make them strong when they're outstretched. If you need them to deal with your body weight when they're outstretched, make them deal with your body weight when they're outstretched. Make them do that, right? Make them do that. That's what you've got to do. You've got to make them deal with the forces that they need to deal with when you're running, or at least set them on that path, right? If you don't even set them on the right path, then they're doomed to failure from the start. All right, so towel scrunches, no. And I know I'm saying things that are contradictory of probably what you've been told in the past, but guess what? I want you to be pain-free. I want you to be injury-free, pain-free, running better. And how are you going to do that when your toes are scrunched up and you're just basically just cycling your way through injuries? You're going from one injury to the next and the next and the next and going, what am I doing wrong? Why? I fixed this injury. No, you didn't. You didn't fix the reason for the injury. You just rested for a little while. The inflammation went down, the pain went away, but then you didn't change the way you move, or you didn't change the ability of the muscles, the fascia, the joints to bear the forces that you're needing them to bear, right? And that's what we do in the runner's rehab and the basic Gait. That's what we do. We teach the body, or we train the body. We're not teaching anything, we're teaching you. We're not teaching the body anything. The body knows what to do. You just got to create the right stimulus, the correct stimulus in the correct place at the correct time, in order to get the right stimulus to do what you want it to do. Okay? And I'm going to leave it on this. How are you going to prepare your feet for landing like this, pronating, supinating, toeing off, if everything you do is like this, going up and down in a squat position? How are you going to prepare the foot for landing 3 times the speed that you run at if you never get your feet off the ground? How are you going to prepare the levers that you need? Because running is all about levers and torque. How are you going to prepare to get that toe in the right place at the right time with the long lever, which is the big toe, if you're scrunching the toes up with a towel? I hope this is making sense. I hope this is making total rational sense. All right? Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. This has been Beach Walk Blog 7, all about the foot and things that are associated with the foot. There's a lot more to it than just the foot, of course, because remember, the foot is just a part of the equation, a very important part of the equation, and the foot is at the mercy of everything above it. Love to you all. Take care. Bye-bye.